topic is Agile Project Management, learn to plan, plan to learn. This is the outline we're going to go through today. So learning to plan, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what is Agile, what are the common practices in Agile. This is only about 30-minute talk, so it'll be quite light. If you have any more questions at the end, you can ask questions for sure. So learning to plan is the why, what and how of Agile. The second step, planning to learn. This is my kind of dive into Agile. It's things that I think help you to get the most out of Agile. So Agile is very much about knowledge. And what I try to encourage you is you may be using Agile today, or you may start using Agile. I want to get you to think about Agile in a different way. I want you to start thinking about Agile as a knowledge-based project management method. So your goal is to get more knowledge and to use that knowledge. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, so why Agile? It's quite a diverse crowd, I think. We've got some experts in here, and we've got some completely new people to project management. So even if you've never managed a project before, you've probably seen something like this. Probably seen the good old waterfall of project management. Requirements, design, build, and test. Certainly very common in software engineering, but the same principles in many industries. This happens over a long period of time. This is the main problem that brought about Agile. Well, not just the length of time, but the fact that you don't really get a deliverable until the very end of the project. This is quite a controversial thing to say. I'm sure people who've worked in waterfall projects before will look at this and say, well, no, you have interaction throughout, you have deliverables throughout. But by its nature, until you've finished the test phase of your project, you've not fully integrated and fully verified your product. So at no step along here are you 100% complete or 100% certain that a feature of your product is complete. This is the first date that you have a real hard deliverable. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about traditional project management. Traditional project management mostly focuses on the performance of the project. Are we doing well? Are we keeping our spending low? Are we being quick enough? So is our schedule on track? Is our cost on track? There's a kind of expectation that the project should be predictable. I'm not saying that any project manager would tell you that they expect predictability, but the nature of traditional project management assumes certain level of predictability. It assumes that you can predict the future. It assumes that you're able to make a plan out into the distance. Which is the next point, actually. You make large plans. You might plan 6 months ahead, 2 years ahead. And if you're putting effort into a plan, if you're designing your plan, if you're reviewing your plan, if you're allocating budget, thinking about your staffing, thinking about your risk, there's a lot of effort that goes into that plan. If you then have to change direction, that effort is wasted. So again, implicit in this strategy, you don't really want change. So planning into the future, putting effort into your plan, means that you don't want to change and you expect a certain level of predictability, a certain level of stability. And this was the final point from the previous slide. the point at which you truly deliver and you truly integrate your product is quite late on. This is the point where you need to verify you've done the right thing. If you don't verify early on, you build the wrong thing, you have lots of rework, you have to go back, your schedule's longer, your costs go up. I've got quite a biased view of traditional project management up here. I guess I've set you up a bit to accept something new. This is not very balanced. So these are really this is a very negative way of looking at traditional project management. But these are generally the pain points in traditional PM. Okay, so we're trying to make a plan. To make a plan, we need knowledge. What kind of knowledge do we need? This may vary a bit industry to industry, but the general cases should apply quite broadly, and perhaps you can think of a way to expand it to other industries. So your product, someone must need your product. You must start with a market need. You must have a niche. And you need to know what that niche is. If you don't know what the niche is, if you don't know where you're aiming in the market, forget everything else. You must have an idea for your product. You must know what you're going to build. You must know the kinds of technology available that you can use to build your product. You must have a certain know-how, familiarity with those technologies to be efficient using them in your project. You have to do your architecture, your design, your kind of high-level planning, how to build your product. And then right at the far end, you have to go through the steps of solving all your day-to-day problems. How do we actually put the pieces together? How do we actually make it work? So I've put them in this order to try to show you there's a kind of flow down here. And the point I really want to make is that if you get the previous step wrong, then the next step is irrelevant. If I've got my market niche wrong, doesn't matter if I make a brilliant product, there's no market for it. So everything below that is wasted effort. So it's very important that we're getting this knowledge early. We have this knowledge available when we need it. I will come back to this slide later. Okay, so at the start of the project, this is where traditionally you make decisions. Looking at the large number of students in here, if you've ever had to write a project proposal, you've probably written, oh, I'm going to do 3 months on this build, I'm going to do 3 months on design, I'm going to do 3 months on testing. You've written a plan for a very long period in advance. You're making decisions at the start of your project. You're trying to predict the whole lifetime of the project. At the start of the project, this is when you have the least knowledge. You don't lose knowledge during the project. You learn about your market, you learn about your product, you learn about the technologies that are available, you learn how to use them better. You learn how to architect and design better. You get better at your job. So this is the kind of main problem with traditional project management, that you're trying to make all your decisions at the front, at the start of the project. This is when you don't know anything. You need knowledge to make good decisions. You're making all your decisions. You don't have any knowledge. I mean, okay, it's a little bit extreme. You have some knowledge. But for sure, this is the worst time during the project to make decisions. I'm not saying make all the decisions at the end. You have to make some decisions. But the general idea is, if you can defer a decision, when you defer it, so if it doesn't cost you to defer a decision, If you can defer it, you gain more knowledge, you make a better decision. Okay, it was a bit more grilling for traditional project management at the start. So thinking, brilliant plan, throwing the plan in the bin. Change happens in projects. If you put a lot of effort into planning, well, I don't want to say that too much. Planning has value, but you have to do the right amount of planning. You don't want to be too rigid. So Agile tries to come in with a different approach. It has some kind of balance to the planning. I definitely don't want to imply there is no planning in Agile. You still plan, but you have to decide a balance, how much is useful. Okay, so why Agile? Because traditional approaches not really appropriate for the modern world, especially, well, I was originally going to talk about lots of drivers like knowledge age, more creative work, globalization making the marketplace more aggressive, but I only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to leave this at that. So, what is Agile? It's going to be controversial again. When you have 30 minutes, you have to be a bit controversial. You have to put your own ideas in. So, Agile is quite broad. This is what I think Agile is. Let's put all of these up. So Agile is, oh no, that's it. Agile is belief in people. So Agile is trying to make a team strong and give them the chance to succeed. If you bring the right people together, if you give them what they need, if you support them, then they will be creative, innovative, they will find a solution to your project. This is a little bit loosely related to the foundation of Agile. So Agile was originally based on a manifesto, which in turn was based on experience of many practitioners, project managers. But the idea they came in with is people is more important than processes. So you need to put faith in your people, you need to give them the chance to succeed. And that's more important than controlling them, making them follow certain processes. Okay, delivering product. This might seem obvious. If you want to have a successful project, you must actually be delivering something. But what I mean is, when you're working on a project, when you're writing a plan, when you're writing documentation, you need to ask yourself, what is the value of this work? Am I doing something that actually gives the business value? Sometimes yes, I'm not saying throw out everything. Sometimes you need process, sometimes you need documentation. But your end goal is not a document, your end goal is a product. So you should be thinking all the time, how can we deliver value? How can we add value to the product? What processes can we get rid of? What can we prioritize so that we're getting the value faster? Okay, frequent feedback. This is probably the one I will talk about the most. And when I discovered Agile, this was the one that I thought was the most important. I've mellowed a little bit, I've added a bit more since then. But for me, this was the first obvious difference between Agile and a traditional project management approach. So what you're trying to do is set up a regular cycle where you learn something. You learn about your product, you learn about your market, you learn about your process. So you're not working for 6 months, you're not working for 1 year, and then finding out very late that you've built the wrong thing, the market doesn't need your product, that you've built the product in the wrong way. So a big part of Agile is deliver early and keep delivering early, keep delivering often. Every time you deliver your product, you can test it, you can check. Have we built the right thing? Are we building the thing in the correct way? pretty much the whole rest of this talk is about this idea, so I'll drop that one for now. And lastly, expecting change. So traditional project management, plan heavy, predicting a long way into the future, you're very fragile to change. You don't want change. In Agile, you expect change. There's no way you can avoid change in a project. You will discover new things, the market will change, people will change. You cannot run management around avoiding change. You have to understand change will happen whether you like it or not. So you should have a management approach that will tolerate change. And we'll come in a bit later to say how this happens. Okay. It's hard to talk in general about Agile because Agile isn't one process, it's a family of processes. But I think it's still worth mentioning this at this step. Most Agile methods tend to be empirical methods. So what that means is you have complete visibility of how you work. You regularly stop to check and think, is there something we could make better? And you regularly make changes, well, as required. You are able to make changes to improve your process. So it's a feedback cycle where you, excuse me, where you examine the reality of what's happening. So you look at real data about how is your project running? Is your product working? Are you building the right thing? Come back to that same old thing. Are you building the right thing? Are you building it right? This is particularly a big point in Scrum. In the Scrum guide, they make quite a big point about this. Scrum is an Agile method. Okay, so I'm going to say kind of the same again. When I first discovered Agile, this is how I summarized Agile. So frequently stop to review your product. And when I say frequently, I mean weeks, maybe every 2 weeks. Am I building the right thing? And if I'm not building the right thing, change direction. Update the direction I'm going in. So update the requirements, replace what I was doing with something that is going to work. Make sure that you're building stuff that's valuable, make sure you're removing things that are wasteful. And frequently review the process. Stop, think, how are we working? Do we have any problems? Are there things we could change to be more efficient? It could be adding some activity, could be removing an activity, could be improving communication, could be changing the way that you transmit information. Could really be anything. This is the idea of empirical processes and of Agile. If you see a problem, you have control of your process. You think, you brainstorm, what can we change? How can we make this better? And these two things I kind of wrap together as stop, think, improve, which honestly is not too dissimilar from transparency, inspection, adaptation. Okay, so this is the spirit of Agile. This is what Agile is trying to achieve. Next we'll talk about how it's going to achieve it. So Agile is a methodology. That means it's a set of guiding principles, a set of goals. So everything I've told you so far is a bit theory. It's things we would like, but I haven't told you anything about how we can achieve that. So Agile does not tell us how to achieve the goals. It just tells us aim for this. So Agile is a methodology. It's like a family. Within Agile, you have methods. These are sets of practices. So that means things that your team will do, like meeting every day or having somebody focusing on the product requirements, having somebody focused on removing problems, putting your staff together in the same place, co-location. So a method is a set of practices that work well together. It's like a template for how your team could work. So these are the three that I'm going to just briefly mention today. Historically, there are many more. Crystal, XP, DSDM. I must say I'm not as familiar with a lot of them. Do remember XP. The most common by far now is Scrum. So I'm not going to say that that's the best solution, but if you've heard of Agile, you've probably also heard of Scrum. If you start working with Agile, you probably started working with Scrum, especially if you started in the last probably 5 years or so. So these are figures taken from a survey. I think these figures are from last year. About 72% of all Agile teams are using Scrum, or some combination, Scrum XP, Scrum Kanban, that kind of thing. About 11% are using Kanban or a combination. Actually, if I remember, only about 5% are using Kanban directly. The other 6%, it's a mix of Scrum and Kanban. So that 6% is in both of these figures. Okay, most of what I talk about from practice-wise are either kind of general practices that you find in many methods, or they're mostly Scrum practices. So some of this will be quite Scrum specific. At least, well, the terminology is quite Scrum specific. But a lot of these practices are, the same ideas appear in many methods. So how do we do it? I think I've got three main ideas to talk about Scrum and Agile. Work in short time boxes. So you're not working for 6 months on something. You're not working for 3 months. You're dividing your time into small cycles, small iterations. Actually, depending on which method, they're called cycles, iterations, sprints, many different words. The idea is that you pick a small piece of work to do, you work on it, and then you stop, you think, you learn about your product, you learn about your process. So by working in small cycles, it helps you to be reasonably tolerant to change. So you're only focusing on short term, you're only committing to short term, and you're forcing yourself to think. You're forcing yourself to say, to stop, think, what could we change? So this is an example from Scrum. In Scrum, you start with a planning meeting. You work. Can't get around that. There's always a work step. At the end of your sprint, you have a sprint review. This is a meeting specifically to look at your product. This is a meeting specifically to think, are we building the right thing? What should we build next? Has this fulfilled the goals that we set out? So we had some requirements, we've built something, does it work? After the review, you have a retrospective, and this is the other side of that. So the review focuses on the product, and the retrospective focuses on the process. Could we work better? Could we work faster? Could we build a higher quality product? And then you won't be surprised, you start again. I've written 1 to 4 weeks. I think most Scrum teams now work either 2 or 3 week sprints. The more technical teams sometimes will work 1 week cycles. Again, something I will touch on later. So you're picking a very small piece of your product. You're building a small piece, and then you're reviewing it, and then you're picking the next piece to build. Okay, second idea. Rolling wave plan. So the idea of a rolling wave plan is that you prioritize the things that you need to do. You put the high priority ones at the top, and you add the detail to that. You analyze them, you put the effort into them. So the things that you're going to do soon, you have a lot of granularity, a lot of detail, many, many small tasks that you know very well. The things that you're not going to do for 6 months, for a year, big blob of something to do, you just leave it. You come to it when you need to. You're not going to build it now, you don't put effort into it now. It does rely on you having a reasonable idea what is important, what is not. But once you realize something is not urgent, not high priority, you leave it at the back. And maybe you get to it later, maybe you don't. Important part of this is that it's always changing, it's always evolving. So if you have new ideas, new direction, you add them to your backlog, maybe at the top, maybe at the middle. If you decide some of your ideas are not relevant anymore, get rid of them. So if you're working on say a 2-week sprint, you've locked into 2 weeks worth of work. This work you will not change. Anything after those 2 weeks, you're free to change. So I mentioned embracing change earlier. Could be anything, could be market change, could be financial change, maybe your company needs to save money, could be a member of your team has just left, a new member of your team has arrived, new opportunity. Anything that drives you to a different priority, you can adapt to that. You just add the new requirements wherever you need in your list, and when you get to them, you do them. I don't know if I mentioned it's called a product backlog, certainly in Scrum. I don't know if it's called a backlog in other things. So I've also heard the term rolling wave plan in a more traditional environment. I think they really share the same idea. Okay, so the third way that Agile operates, I mentioned this before, empowered teams. Typically small teams. Small teams are able to respond and react more quickly. Could be a network of small teams, but you have autonomy within the teams. Self-organizing, so they manage themselves. They decide how they will work, what practices they will do. Depending on the company, they might have control of their environment as well. Oh, well, which I'm about to say down here. And cross-functional. So your team has a mix of different skills. So you have enough people in your team, enough different skills in your team, you can build the product within the team. So I will keep using software examples because that's what I'm familiar with. But you can use this in other cases as well. In a software world, you might have a test team and a build team and a deployment team. Seems like a reasonably sensible thing to do, and share that knowledge between them. In an agile environment, you do not have that. You mix these skills together. So you have a team which combines the development, the design, the testing, the deployment, all those skills are together. That means you can react quickly, it means you're not waiting for another team, you're not stuck with company politics. Everyone you need is within the team. If you have a problem, your team can solve the problem. Yes, and if I already mentioned environment. So in an ideal case, you have control of your environment. So you can arrange the desk spaces, you can do whatever you need to make yourself efficient. Maybe the work hours would be flexible. A team made their project manager bring fruit in every day. So by having fresh fruit around, help them to focus, help them to enjoy working there. So this is how they controlled their environment. And controlling the process, so if there's something that you think is not working, you have the control to change it. So you own the process. And this is coming back to cross-functional. Okay, so this is Learn to Plan, Introduction to Agile. I'm now going to talk a little bit about what I see as a common error within Agile teams, which is the fact that the team is somewhat within isolation. They are building a product, and then that product is finished, but it just sits there, and it doesn't go back to where it needs to go. I was talking before about the different knowledge that you need on your project, and the fact that if you get one layer wrong, the layer below is irrelevant. If I don't understand my market, doesn't matter if I make a beautiful product. I've built the wrong product. So this is what I consider to be a major error within Agile teams, Scrum teams, which is that they're very focused on building the product, and when they finish building it, they put it down and it's done, and it doesn't really get pushed all the way back up. It doesn't get pushed back to the market, doesn't get tested, verified. Does this do what people need it to do? Yes, it works. Yes, it does what the requirements say. But is anyone going to use it? And then I've picked on a few things that I think are reasonably common amongst teams. We'll have to see whether people think these are things that they've seen before. So, delivering the wrong features. So you've built something, it works, but it wasn't the most important feature. It wasn't what you needed now. It isn't the highest value feature. I'll come on to each of these in the next slides as well. The thing that's delivered is not usable. So it's partial work. So could be that they've put some effort in. I'll go back to no, actually, I'm going to leave it till we get to the slide on that. So they've delivered something, but you cannot actually use that thing. You cannot check, does this meet our need? The team is working on tasks that are too big, which means it's taking them a long time to get to a point where they deliver something. And I have a very subjective idea of large. For me, a large task is something that takes more than a day. And then lastly, you get to the delivery point, everything's happy, it's tested, it works, but it's not verified against the market. So these first four are really about we're being slow or we're doing the wrong work. And the last one is we think we're doing the right work, but we never actually check that we're doing the right work. And we need to really continue up to that point. And this is why I think this is important. If you're continuing to work on a product that you think is working, but you haven't actually tested it against the market, you haven't actually brought it back to a user, you haven't actually put it in the real world, then you could be working on the wrong thing. You could be making something beautiful, something brilliant, something that works very well, but it might still be the wrong product. So everything you're doing is potentially wasteful if you haven't gone back and checked this is what the market needs today. Okay, so that was my pitch for why I'm going to talk about the next slides. So first one's quite easy, maybe quite obvious in a way. It's about prioritizing your requirements. So I called this plan to learn. Each of the ideas here are about maximizing the learning that you do in your process. So, I did say this might look a bit silly. You must deliver the highest value features early. So, do not look at your product and think, I see this actually a lot on my student projects. The first thing that gets delivered is the login page. I know this is a slightly contrived example, but if you're building a product, you need to know if that product is useful. Do not spend 2 weeks making a beautiful login page. You don't need to test the login page, right? You guys here in the professional community are laughing, but my students are crying because they spend months building these beautiful login pages and never actually build the app. So what do I mean? You have to be very careful to choose the features that are important or that you think are important and build them first, so you can test them first and make sure that you are correct. Because if you're not building those high value features till 3 months down the line, and then you find out, actually, we don't need these, actually, the market needs something else, those 3 months are wasted. So it sounds silly, but the idea is, if you think something is valuable, build that first and verify that it is actually what you need. If it's not, maybe you need to change direction. Maybe you need to build something else. You want to discover that early. You want the knowledge early so you can make a good decision on that. If there's something you don't know, for example, what technologies can we use? Will this technology work? You might choose to work on something that helps you increase your knowledge about it. In software, we tend to call this a spike. So you take a short period of time to investigate something, try to very quickly discover, is this appropriate or not? So same idea here. You're trying to gain knowledge so that you make sure you're going in the right direction. And this essentially is a risk-lowering activity. These get weaker as they go down. The last one I want to bring up is dependencies. So if you have a piece of work that is blocking another piece of work, then given the choice, if everything else is equal, finish the blocking work as soon as possible. Because you don't want to discover later, actually, it's a very big piece of work, and now we cannot continue on the other piece of work. So it's kind of in order. Deliver the things that you think are important and check that they're doing what you think they're doing. If there's something you don't know, go after it, find out, learn about it, so that you can plan better, you know how long it will take you, you know whether it's going to work or not. And if everything else is equal, then kill off the things which are going to get in your way. Okay, this one's a little bit more common, I would say. Even, actually, I think this is surprisingly difficult, even if you are working every day in a professional environment. Surprisingly difficult to, discipline yourself to stick to this. Again, I'm taking a software example. So if you imagine this is your product, and you have pieces of work, and you could divide them into different types of work. So you have some work about user interface, some about networking, some about the business logic, some about the database. Most programmers will try to kind of work on one block of work at once. So I might go, I'll work on the database today. I'll do everything database today. Actually, that's exactly the example I have here. So I spend a lot of time working on the database. We get to the end of the sprint. I come to show my work. I have nothing. You cannot see the database. You cannot use the database. We haven't proved anything. this doesn't tell us anything about, does the product do what we need? Are we building it correctly? So you need to discipline yourself to pick functional-based requirements. Every time that you take on a task, that task should deliver something that could then be used, that potentially you could release to a customer. And that potentially releasable idea is important, because if it's potentially releasable, it means that you can test it, you can verify it, and make sure it does the right thing. If it's not potentially releasable, it's just sat there. So anything that you've put effort into that you're not getting something back from is essentially waste. This sounds a lot easier than you might think. It's very tempting to, at the beginning of your sprint, to plan a bunch of features. You know what you need to build in that cycle, in that sprint. And then inside that sprint, you spend the first 3 days doing all the database work for that sprint. The ideal goal is that every day you are finishing something. At the end of the day, you can check that works. And then if the sprint ends, you've still delivered all these pieces. Maybe you haven't delivered everything, but all the things you finished could be tested, could be released, could be earning you money. Okay, the next one is kind of like really rubbing this in. So I just said that a good task might be something like sharing a photo. So let's say we're building Facebook. So a user-facing task. When I finished it, I can use it, I can see if it works. But that might be a very big task. So what we want to do is cut that into the smallest pieces we possibly can. I don't want a task that takes me 2 weeks to finish. I want 10 tasks, every task takes 1 day to finish. So I might split my task up into a basic version that has the minimal features, and then perhaps a feature to tag friends, we'll add that in. Perhaps an editor to retouch the photos. Perhaps in the original version we could only upload one photo, now we can upload multiple photos. The idea is you take that big task, you cut it into as many pieces as you can, and you build them incrementally. That way, no matter when your deadline is, some of it is done, some of it's finished. Actually, I've got a whole load of reasons why to do this. At any point you can give up and you've still got value. You can prioritize the different tasks differently. So if you've got one big task, you might think this is urgent. If you cut it into 10 pieces, maybe 3 small pieces are urgent and the other 7 pieces, you do them later. I've got a whole list of, I have to check my slides. There's about 5 or 6 reasons why this actually helps you when you're planning. Okay, and the last main idea is that when you're running Scrum, when you're running Agile, it's not just a product team running Agile. It needs to be the people above the team as well. It needs to be the marketing team. It needs to be the people interacting with customers. It needs to be not just, yes, this works. It needs to be, okay, we finished this, now let's take it to a customer. Let's continue to that verification step. Does this work in market? So we really want a product owner who's very active. We want a product owner is the person who decides what work to do and is responsible for checking it when it's done. So you don't just want Agile within your team, you want Agile to continue beyond that. As soon as something is built, it's then going into market or A/B tests, or it's going to a panel of real-world users so they can actually check that it does meet the business need. You've kind of got this almost V, God, that sounds very traditional, got an almost V of levels where you've got to start with what's the need, how are we going to fill the need, how are we going to build it, and so on. And eventually you need to go back up the other side. If you're only doing Agile in the bottom of that V, if you're only doing Agile in the build area, you don't really know that you're creating value. You might be wasting a lot of time. Okay, this is where that slide comes back in. So you have some idea of your market, or you have some idea for your product, and you've gone down and you've built it, and you've come back up, and you know that you've built it correctly. Perhaps you know that it meets your idea. You need to keep going. You need to make sure that, if you're working in an Agile environment, delivering every 2 weeks, but you only show it to a customer every 6 months, and customer might be the wrong word, you only show it to the end user every 6 months, then you're missing a step of Agile that could take you further. Okay, so I think most people who will have done some Agile before probably have done Scrum. So this is a suggestion for you. You might want to try. You could talk about it in your retrospective. So Kanban is another Agile method. It does not have a cycle. So in Scrum, you might be doing something every 2 weeks. In Kanban, you have a continuous flow. So as long as there's work waiting for me, I'm taking it. And that can include your product owner. So you don't need to be waiting till the end of 2 weeks to review a big block of functionality. If you're actually making your requirements small, independent, vertical, verifiable, every time you finish one, you can hand it over and it could be tested immediately. So every time your product owner is free, every time they have availability, they can pull that work, verify they're happy with it. That might happen every day, might happen every 3 days. This is a way to keep that so you don't have your product just sat on a shelf waiting, not doing anything. You can, so as well as this, you can still keep your heartbeat of your project. You can keep your cycle if you want that for maybe communicating with management or your retrospectives, or maybe you want to do a presentation every 2 weeks. That's not exclusive. You can do both. So you could internally work a very continuous way and externally kind of pile up a basket full of delivered features and then present them together. Maybe I should mention as well, this isn't just for the product owner. So in Kanban, the way it works, you have a backlog, but you do not take a piece of the backlog into a sprint. You just, every time you're free, you take the next item off the top of the backlog. If you finish a task Tuesday afternoon, you just take the next task off the backlog. So it's a more continuous version. Okay. So summary, I hope this is what I've communicated. Agile, the main difference is try to get as much knowledge as you can. So keep pulling in knowledge. And that knowledge is about how you build things, but also why you're building things. So typically it's a frequent cycle. When you get that knowledge, use it. Change direction. Make sure that knowledge is helping you to make the best decisions. So this is for me, this is a very high level summary of Agile. And then this is what I'm trying to communicate today, that maximize the value you're getting by seeking out knowledge, deliberately picking things that teach you something, teach you about the product, teach you about the market, teach you about how you're building something. So hunt more knowledge. And these were ideas how to do that. Maybe smaller tasks, deliver more often. Again, I don't know what you guys are familiar with, but fairly typical. You might be working on some task for 5 days, maybe more than 5 days. When I say deliver quickly, I really mean your tasks could be as short as a few hours, and I aim to have tasks less than 1 day. For me, if a task takes more than 1 day, I should be able to split it into more pieces and then deliver them independently. And why are we doing this? Because, and you think it works, but it doesn't actually meet the market, then you're putting effort that is just waste. So you need to take this back, all the way back up, verify it. Okay, I don't actually have a question slide, but I guess this is probably the slide we could keep on for questions. So if anyone has any questions, I hope I can answer them.
You have mentioned a lot about Scrum process or the Scrum method. I think some of the people in this room don't know about the Scrum. Can you touch a little bit about the Scrum?
I would say there's 3 main ideas in Scrum. One of them is the time box. So you pick a kind of repeating unit of time, maybe say 2 weeks. And then every 2 weeks you pick some work to do, you work on it, at the end you review it, and you review yourself as well. And then you restart. So you pick another piece of work. There's lots of advantages for this. Actually, one of the ones I didn't mention was commitment. If you're kind of identifying this is the work for the next 2 weeks, typically you're more committed to finishing that work. And you start to get a better understanding how much work you can do, how much work is left, that kind of thing. So this is one of the main ideas in Scrum. This cycle is actually Scrum, not Agile. And I have skipped something on here, which is the daily Scrum, which is a daily meeting. So that's a big part of Scrum. It's called the rituals of Scrum, so the meetings of Scrum. The second thing I didn't really cover in the slides, which is that there are 3 main roles in Scrum. There's a product owner, a Scrum Master, and a development team. And the product owner is responsible for the direction of your product. So they decide what to do. Literally every sprint they say, this is what is important now. And they might change direction. So one day they might think, this is where we're going for the next 3 sprints. And then you discover something, and they say, actually, we're going to go over here, we're going to build this instead. Scrum Master is a facilitator, someone who gets rid of problems, supports the team, that kind of thing. And the development team is the same that I had on this slide. So a small group, I think in Scrum, 3 to 9, I want to say. 3 to 9 people. 3 would be very small. 9, I would argue 9 is quite big. And they have all the skills they need. So within the team, they can get something done. So the main difference with Kanban is that you don't have a cycle. You don't have a 2-week cycle. What you have is actually, they have quite different perspectives on it. So Kanban is more about transparency and monitoring your performance. So typically you identify all the different tasks you must do, and you set a kind of limit how much work per task you can work on at any one time. So you say, for testing, we can do 2 tasks at once, but that's it. And that helps you to track. If you start seeing work piling up somewhere, it helps you to identify there's a problem in that place. We're not processing this area fast enough. That's probably the main idea. And that's supported by not having, so you don't have a sprint. In Scrum, you have this kind of crazy rush where you at the beginning of the sprint you have a lot of work, and then it kind of like gets less and less and less to the end. I'm not describing that well. Probably most people are starting to get more agitated towards the end. In Scrum you have a pile of work at the beginning, and you take away from it, and at the end you have hopefully an empty pile. Whereas in Kanban there is no pile. You just have the backlog. If you finish something, you take a new item off the backlog. So you don't have a 2-week commitment to anything.
So you have an advantage of being able to produce each iteration of a product pretty quickly and cheaply, right? So what is your thought on applying it to other industries, let's say, biotech or other things that sometimes, it takes a lot of time and money to develop just, one version of the product?
I have a friend who used it to plan their wedding, for example. Like, it's not just software. And I know Saab used it to build a fighter jet. So they were literally every 3 weeks taking the jet apart, rebuilding it every 3 weeks, and flying it every 3 weeks. So it's possible. I think it takes quite a change in mindset, and it might take a change in strategy. Like, you might have to break up your product in a way that it can be built incrementally, and you might have to think carefully about what are the expensive parts and so on. I would say with CAD, for example, with the kind of growth of CAD, I would say industries like automotive industry are now more agile-like. They are doing these short cycles, and they're doing kind of virtual integration very regularly. I guess the other thing to mention is, so on the slide about methods, I said Scrum, Kanban, Lean. Lean is not strictly agile. It's not come from the agile movement. Lean has come from Toyota manufacturing cars, and their philosophy is, it's a very different perspective, but it fits very nicely into agile because the kind of direction is very much the same. The main idea in Lean, I'm not an expert in Lean, but I will still pretend I am. The main idea, as I understand, is you monitor very carefully to find waste. So you try to find activities that are not adding value, and you eliminate them, or you optimize other activities, or you align activities. I would think that might be more directly applicable in bioengineering. Like, you might just be able to, it's more about a streamlining of your process. But I think it's got similar value. Like, the idea of waste in Lean is very similar to the idea of empirical processes, like observe, inspect, adapt. Little bit heavier process, but I wouldn't say that they're not agile. I was cheating in a way by talking about traditional project management. I think project management has evolved, and it's embraced a lot of the good things of Agile, and it's also, in some senses, mirrors some of the good parts of Agile. So I don't like, the traditional comparison is waterfall versus Agile, and that typically is a very unfair. Waterfall tends to lose rather heavily. But if you look at the kind of more modern equivalent of that, I think it's a fairer comparison. I think there is room for it. What I would say, though, in the other direction, is that sometimes Agile gets kind of pigeonholed as a software development management approach. But I think that's just because often these are teams who have that flexibility, that control, that they can choose to use Agile. I think if you took a team in another area, like sales, marketing, I don't know, but I think if they were aware of Agile, if they were given training on Agile, I think they could find ways to use it in whatever they do. I think typically it's just people tend to get put on projects rather than trained how to manage projects. So, sorry, your question was: is there space for other project management approaches? I think there definitely is room. In the course that I teach on PM, I tend to divide it along the lines of about predictability and about cost to build. Actually, Ashanton mentioned cost to build as well. If you have a very predictable project, you might be able to save money by being a little bit more prescriptive in your approach. But the counter I always use to that is, are any projects really predictable? I don't know. I think maybe it's a kind of yes, no, maybe kind of question. Yeah, my feeling is that every project has some unpredictability, and Agile deals with that quite well. My kind of rather harsh view of it is when you're doing the heavier planning, Agile often gets picked on as, you know, it's great for the developers, but we don't know where we're going to be in 3 months. And my argument is, if I write a really big plan for 3 years in advance, I still don't know where I'm going to be in 3 months, but I'm pretending that I do know. So my argument is that traditional project management is really, you're going beyond your knowledge. You're pretending that you can predict something that you actually cannot, whereas Agile accepts it cannot predict it. In both cases, you don't know where you'll be in 3 months, but at least Agile, you're embracing that and you're kind of trying to make sure that you quickly get into the right direction, whereas I think the more traditional approaches kind of box you in and make it harder to move. I should say I'm not an expert on much beyond Agile. I mostly practice Agile, and I mostly work in software as well.
คิดว่าเป็นกิจกรรมที่ดีมากนะครับก็คือถ้าเกิดพูดถึงเรื่องของ Creative Community ผมว่าส่วนสำคัญมันก็มี2ส่วนเนาะก็ส่วนของคนกับไอเดียคือถ้าเรามีกิจกรรมลักษณะนี้ที่สามารถจะดึงคนจากหลากหลายคณะมาโดยเฉพาะนิสิตแล้วก็อาจารย์มาฟังไอเดียใหม่ๆแล้วเราก็มีช่วงที่เราถามตอบและดิสคัสกันเนี่ยว่ามันก็ทำให้มันเกิดปฏิสัมพันธ์ของไอเดียแล้วมันก็จะได้มีอะไรใหม่ๆขึ้นมาแล้วก็บางทีคือแค่การที่คนจากหลากหลายสาขาเนี่ยมาเจอกันเนี่ยแค่นี้ผมว่ามันก็เปิดโอกาสหลายๆอย่างขึ้นได้มากแล้ววันนี้ผมก็เจอพี่ๆน้องๆหลายคนที่ไม่ได้เจอมาก่อนหน้านี้อะไรเงี้ยผมว่าก็เป็นกิจกรรมที่ดีครับ
ก็เป็นกิจกรรมที่ดีมากๆเลยค่ะเพราะว่าปกติในบริษัทเนี่ยก็มีการใช้Agileในบริษัทอยู่แล้วอันนี้ก็แบบมาเหมือนเพิ่มพูนความรู้แล้วก็ทำให้เข้าใจกับAgileมากขึ้นค่ะ
แล้วคิดยังไงที่มันเกิดมีเวทีอย่างนี้ค่ะที่มีการเกี่ยวกับเทคโนโลยีไปถึงปัจจุบัน
รู้สึกว่ามันเยี่ยมมากเลยค่ะเพราะว่าปกติเราจะเห็นแค่ในกรุงเทพใช่ไหมคะนี่มีการเริ่มในจังหวัดพิษณุโลกก็คิดว่าเป็นเรื่องที่ดีค่ะเพราะว่าในพิษณุโลกเนี่ยก็มีหลายๆคนที่เป็นคนทางด้านเทคโนโลยีอยู่แล้วแล้วก็ได้มารวมตัวกันแล้วก็แชร์เรื่องที่มันสามารถพัฒนาตัวเราขึ้นไปได้อีกค่ะ